1972 war
In 1972, there was an advertisement in Motorrad magazine
Da hat die Firma Lewis drauf
in which the Lewis Kawasaki showroom presented it, but you couldn't see much. It was just like, here's the new Kawasaki.
Und dann sind wir im September
And then in September of 1972, we drove to the IFMA bike fair. I got a prospectus and I took one look at it, and I knew, that's my dream machine.
Traummaschine. Das war
82 horsepower, faster than 130 miles an hour, 0 to 100 in 4 seconds, superior to any racing car.
Das machte damals keine Rennwagen.
Der Kawasaki-Stand
We were practically mobbed on the Kawasaki stage because the Z1 was the attraction at the IFMA.
schlechthin. Die Prospekte wurden
People snatched the brochures from our hands. They were in a frenzy. We could have given them whole newspapers. They weren't even looking. They saw something was being given away and grabbed it.
einfach nur zugegriffen.
It was the most powerful, the fastest, 0 to 100 in 4.2 seconds. It was everything a motorcycle should be. The one the world's been waiting
Worauf die
for.
Welt gewartet hat. 1972 habe ich
In 1972, I was working here as an apprentice in Hamburg Harbor at Borchardt Kai when I collected Germany's very first Z1.
Kurz nach der IFMA bekamen wir das
Shortly after the IFMA motorcycle show, we received the test model, meaning the bike needed to be adapted to German driving standards.
gestaltete sich so, dass wir den Holzverschlag geöffnet haben. Das
What happened was, we opened the wooden casing, and there it was, ready to go.
Und einmal
We just had to turn the key, press the starter, and the 4-cylinder engine started purring.
Dann hieß es, Günther, nun fahr mal.
They said, Gunther, why don't you go straight over to Renzelstrasse 7, which is where the bike was to be prepared for the test, and I drove off.
Normalerweise braucht man aus dem Hafen.
Normally you drive the distance from the harbor to Renzelstrasse in 20 to 30 minutes, but this tour took a little longer.
Ich glaube, ich bin 2-3
I think I arrived 2 or 3 hours later, and they'd already filed a missing persons report.
Wir waren in 0, nix aus.
We sold out in no time. I seem to remember the first shipment consisted of 500 bikes, which were advance orders,
Und wir konnten gar
and we
nicht,
simply couldn't get enough Z1s to cover demand.
wie wir Aufträge hatten. Das haben auch dann ganz schnell
Hamburg's pimps soon latched onto
Spitz
it,
bekommen und
and the
das
Z1 became their new status symbol.
Statussymbol erkoren.
The Corvette wasn't cool anymore, nor the Jaguar. The new trendy vehicle was the Z1.
Und so gab
So these characters poured into the showroom, some of them with huge piles of 5-mark notes.
es 5-Mark-Scheine. Und heute
And
machen wir
today,
was
we
anderes.
do things differently.
Untermalt wurden das
It was supported by the test reports, obviously.
der Franz Josef Schirmer.
Franz Josef Schirmer rode the Z1 round the Nürburgring.
Die Tester.
Actually, the test riders just couldn't believe the results.
Das ist ein Artikel in der Motorradzeitschrift.
Here's a 30-year-old article in Motorrad Zeitschrift, Europe's top-selling magazine for motorcyclists.
Und heute, 30
And today,
Jahre
30 years later, I rode the exact same bike on the north slope of Nürburgring.
ein wunderschönes
A
Erlebnis.
wonderful experience.
Das war das stärkste, schnellste.
The Kawasaki Z900 was the most powerful, the fastest, if not the heaviest bike, and it was earth-shattering. It had almost 80 horsepower,
Und wir sind
and we took it out on Nürburgring for the big test for Motorrad magazine.
zum Test am Nürburgring. Haben kältere Kerzen reingeschaut, also sprich.
We changed the plugs for colder ones. These are plugs designed to withstand greater heat, and it was all go. And Ernst Leverkus, who was called Klax and was the king of testers back then, came along with his wife Inga, and they brought the photoelectric beam, and we fitted the tachometer, the onboard systems recorder, and off he went. 1 round Nürburgring, 2 rounds, evaluate the tachometer, another round and another, then increase the tire pressure. After 5 rounds, the tank was empty. We met up at the finish line, and Klax was euphoric. We had readings of 210, 218. The fastest was 227.58 kilometers per hour. He just couldn't believe it.
This is Daisy.
You may not believe it, but my faithful companion here is over 30 years old. To be more accurate, she was born in 1972. She's enjoying her retirement. It wasn't just Daisy who was born in 72, but also the Kawasaki Z1. Now here we have a real treasure. Vehicle identification number Z1F00167, born on the second day of production. Invaluable, of course. And she's waiting to be resurrected to shine again in new old splendor, like the Z1B next to it. Here we have a Z650B. It's special because it truly only has 1,200 kilometers on the dial and only one previous owner. Then we have something a little more modern. These are from two different chassis manufacturers, but I think you can see that a lot of loving care has gone into these, and certainly a great deal of money. I'll never forget how I used to stand outside the huge showroom windows of the Louis dealership. My dream seemed unattainable. But I eventually got my first Z1. It was a pretty exotic machine in terms of getting hold of spare parts, and that's how I found out who had bits and pieces lying around. And the result can be seen right here, though, as I say, I never dreamt it would come to this. The whole thing just sort of snowballed and developed a momentum of its own. Here's another real treasure. Vehicle identification number Z1F00121. First day of production and quite definitely not for sale. More and more people came around looking for spare parts and offering to swap an item. And somehow there was always a common spirit, an aura surrounding this motorcycle. And it's still that way today.
Irgendwo hier muss es sein. Ich bin mir ganz sicher. Es war immer hier. Was macht mich aus?
What makes me tick? Maybe I'm still a bit of a freak. Unlike my competitors, I haven't really moved on. I still tinker around, much as I did 20 years ago. But that also means, say someone wants to go on vacation on Sunday, and their clutch cable breaks at 8 o'clock Saturday night. I'll drive over and fix it, so the vacation tour can go ahead as planned.
In mint condition and practically invaluable, the Z1A. Mickey's assessment of what a machine like this represents.
The 1974 model was characterized by the lighter shade engine. The paintwork was basically the same. The only alteration was that the lines ran differently. They were in orange-white or in yellow and white.
I think my mother always knew I'd, go my own way. But I did have occasional flare-ups with my dad. It's typical, isn't it? The oldest son's expected to take over and work on the farm in the Black Forest, not to meddle around with bike deals or some such lark. I bought a Z1000 and a Z1000 MK2 before I was drafted into the Army. I brought them home and left them. Nobody needed to know about it because Kawasaki had a terrible reputation those days. Everyone just wanted to ride the latest motorcycle. A Kawasaki Z1000 eats oil, the engine fails, but I didn't care. I thought it was simply amazing. I'd say my specialty is that I'm able to get a hold of a range of bikes. I'm flexible. Now, most people aren't that specialized on Zs. I mean, it's changed. A few years ago, there were certain dealers that only sold Z1s, Z900s, Z1000s, maybe the odd 1000R or J, or a Z650, but that was about it. I also have an Eddie Lawson racing bike, which was known as an S1. The aficionados can appreciate what kind of motorcycle that is. I'm not quite sure with that one, whether it's the original frame, but the rest of it, the chassis components, the motor, and so forth, are genuine factory parts that were built into the machine back then. For me, Kawasaki was always the classic cult bike, but I must admit that I was adulterous once. For 6 months, I rode a Harley. I suppose it was one of those phases everybody goes through. At the same time, I was still riding the Z1 and MK2, and what happened was that the Harley sort of disappeared again.
The next, the 1975 model known as the Z1B, had different paintwork. It was available in blue and in red. At the same time, Kawasaki had developed a new chain with O-rings, so there was less wear. That enabled them to dispense with the oil pump and the oil tank, which was under the left side cover.
Freedom. Some people discover it up in the sky, others on the roads of Tyrol, surrounded by breathtaking scenery and wild animals. And the winner is Helmut.
Ab 1976
From 1976 onwards, you had the new model, the Z900.
Z100
The Z900 has a huge range of features its predecessor lacked,
Unterschiede zum Vorgängermodell.
starting with the twin disc brakes as standard feature on the front wheel, and the modified fork. The instruments were easier to read, so there was all that, and you could now also lock the cap on the petrol tank. The curved duck-end rear was made squarer, same as the tail light. The saddle got a new cover and was designed to be more comfortable. The appealing 4x4 layout was kept, as was the rear drum brake. The Z900 had a new frame with a 5mm increase in the thickness of the tubing. Kawasaki tried to limit the maximum speed by fitting the bike with a smaller 26mm carburetor. That gave it smoother acceleration, but it also capped the top speed you used to be able to reach in the high rev region.
Also, ich erzähle euch mal meine Geschichte.
I'll tell you my story.
Mein Baby.
It's about my baby, and it all began in 1979.
Seitdem habe ich mich den Kawasaki.
That was the year I got hooked on Kawasaki Zs. I still think it's the bike. It looks fantastic, and that's exactly what I keep hearing from all the people who grew up with them. Anyway, it all started back then, when people said to me, Henning, can you check the valves and chain on my bike? And there's a rattling noise in there somewhere.
Da klappert.
So, I'd take a look. Of course I made blunders. You might call it the price of an education. When I think back on those humble beginnings 24 years ago already, and now my partner Harry and I have this nice big workshop in Lincolnheim.
Wir haben uns drauf spezialisiert.
We set ourselves the task of imbuing new life into old Zs,
Dabei, wenn möglich,
preferably without having to worry about financial constraints. I'd say what we do is recreate genuine bikes, perfect in each and every detail.
wiederbelebt.
We have our contingent of regular customers. I'd say they're all people who grew up with Kawas. At some point, they had to sell their bikes because they got married and had children, which is great, but it meant the moped had to go. Now the kids have been taken care of and put through school, so it's possible for them to revive the old dream.
Also wenn wir die Motorräder reinbekommen,
When we get a bike, the first thing we do is to completely dismantle it. Then the frame is sandblasted and given a layer of synthetic coating. The motor is also taken apart, and we sandblast it ourselves because because we didn't like the results we got when others did it. The screws are sent away to be galvanized, chrome-plated, or whatever. Parts that require paintwork are sent to the paint shop. The idea is, when we hold our annual Z-Fans meeting and the 900s are lined up, that they all look exactly the same. I believe this can only be achieved with proper craftsmanship, and I think we do a pretty good job. The nice thing about it is, I'm basically just enjoying my hobby. During the day, I work in my dental lab. In the evening, I wander through the workshop, and in my free time, I ride motorcycles.
As with hardly any other bike, design and color contribute to the Z1's cult status. And hardly anyone knows more about this than Heinz Slöblein.
Zum Z-Kawa-Virus kam ich durch einen
I
Kauf
caught the
eines
Z-Kawa virus when I bought a Z650 and restored it after it had been demolished in an accident.
hergerichtet und dann waren es im Endeffekt
Over the years, I ended up owing 3 Z650s.
gefahren habe und dann
But I always wanted a
nach
Z1.
der Z1, weil ich mit 15 Jahren
Ever since I first saw one when I was 15.
gesehen habe, als mein Bruder
Back then, a colleague of my brother drove onto the yard to show off his bike.
und mein Bruder die Z1 gezeigt
When
hat
my
und
brother
dann
got on the
bin ich
back,
drauf,
I
jetzt
thought,
sind die losgefahren.
wow,
Und dann
that's
dachte
a
ich mir,
dream
das ist
of a
ein
bike.
traumhaftes Motorrad.
And the
Und
image
es
just
ist
stayed in my
immer
mind.
geblieben. Und dann die Entscheidung jetzt.
So I made a decision. I took some money and went to the veteran bike mart in Ulm to buy a Z1. That's what I did.
Wie hat sie überhaupt ausgesehen? Was ist das
Then I
für ein
asked myself
Baujahr?
what the bike used to look like. What year was it manufactured?
Welche Farbe hat sie überhaupt?
I got a hold of the literature and found out about things like what the original color was.
Diese Farben nachzumachen.
Then in my spare time and during breaks, I'd try to mix the right color. But for years it wasn't perfect. I sprayed sample after sample, and I went to old-timer fairs and bought parts that still had the original paintwork on them. That's how I found out what was available on the market and what the originals look like. Painstakingly, after spraying hundreds of samples, I finally managed to get a finish that looked exactly like the original. I had to learn all about how they'd done the layering. But in the end, I got the hang of it. I do it more or less like the Japanese did, with a special 3-layer gloss coating.
Perfection in every detail. The Z Fleet, belonging to Austrian collector Helmut Winner.
1977, Kawasaki introduced the successor model, the Z1000A1. The main difference to the Z900 is the new 4-in-2 exhaust and the rear disc replacing the drum brake. There are minor changes in the circuitry, the filter frame and so on. But on the whole, it's a very similar bike to the Z900. It was available in wine color with gold stripes and dark blue, also with gold stripes.
Z1 passion is something fans seem to be born with. But the fanatical collector's obsession is what keeps the spirit of this once fastest road series motorcycle alive.
Also ein bisschen muss man schon sein, sonst...
You have to be a bit of a fanatical collector. Otherwise, it just won't work. Lots of people claim I don't really want to sell anything. And there's a grain of truth in that. I collect everything that might be vaguely usable. So if I look at something in the light of day and I think, I just might be able to use that at some point, I keep it. It's like with all classic motors, the old Porsches, Ferraris, the old MV Augustus, or whatever.
Tuning is still very popular. Many try to improve performance using simple methods, often with surprising results. Their bike is more sluggish after they've tinkered with it than before.
Many people think that if they buy an 1100cc bike and get whopping big carburetors and a 4-in-4 exhaust system, which in itself limits performance, they'll get 150 horsepower, but that's just not realistic. Something like that doesn't even give you 100 horsepower. Basically, we sell our clients the fruits of our experience we've acquired over the years, especially with regard to the new warranty we give them. Despite the tuning, we give a reasonable warranty, but I must say we'll only do that if we've actually carried out all the tuning ourselves. For example, in the past we didn't pay that much heed to the exhaust. The most important thing was that it was noisy, but we came to realize that a decent exhaust will do more for you than any tuning measure combined with a cylinder kit. You could say that we make heavy-duty bikes with a little more performance, yet that won't cause problems in the short run. The Kawasaki motors were always popular machines for tuning because all the components are large capacity, except the cooling system. So if you're going to enhance the engine in any major way, you really have to keep a rigid eye on the cooling.
There aren't that many parts that still require the full treatment, but if so, one knows the people that can do the job.
When it comes to expensive paintwork, Heinz Löblein really is the only guy for the job. The authentic finish he achieves is far superior to anything anybody else can do, and he uses the same methods as Kawasaki. It's the so-called Lasur method. Heinz explained it to me once, but I guess I really didn't understand it. But the results he gets are phenomenal.
In 1978, the second version of the Z1000 appeared. It was called Z1000A2, and there were only very minor changes, like the calipers were now situated behind the slider, and the master brake fluid cylinder was square rather than round. The saddle pattern was changed, and you could buy the bike in red or in green with gold stripes.
Hey Mickey, already forgotten? There was a Z1000A2 made exclusively for the US market, black with gold stripes.
Here we are in the cellar of the factory where the bikes are kept. Above me is the galvanizing plant, where I earn the money that I then invest in my collection down here. What you're seeing is just a sample, the better models. And where it will end, I just don't know. As always, I'm on the lookout for new material. I wasn't even 18, 16 in fact, when I had my first Z1, and that's how it started. So I bought a variety of bikes, mainly crash vehicles and wrecks, and I restored them. So I managed to get a hold of this and that. What you see here is the result of 25 years of collecting. When I started out, I soon hit upon the necessity of having to have parts treated, getting them a paint job and so forth. And in my search for someone who can galvanize, I ended up with this firm, which I can now call my own.
The value of a collection is in large part determined by the workmanship invested in the individual parts. When it comes to manual galvanizing, Wolfgang Rode is the expert.
It's what definitely makes the difference. And you only get the right result if you go walking along the basins and apply the chemicals manually. A machine can't differentiate. It treats a bolt exactly the same way as a gas tank. And that's what it looks like when you're done. It's not cheap. It's a lot of work and takes up loads of time. And there are constantly new rules and regulations being issued concerning toxic waste disposal.
For Wolfgang Rode, correct handling of chemicals is
a major issue. I was lucky because 2 years ago I set about building this new workshop. And before I did that, I found out what the authorities demanded in terms of safety, so I could adhere to their requirements. I designed the workshop with these things in mind, the handling of the chemicals and so on. The building was designed specifically with the galvanizing process in mind, so there isn't a lot that can go wrong. Well, nothing really.
In 1974, they'd already started work on a new 1000cc engine, a completely new design. In part, they were inspired by looking at the preferences visitors at German racetracks displayed. They saw that their clients liked to customize their machines with 4-in-1 exhaust systems, the gator, special rims, additional side covers and so on. The racing bike look. So Kawasaki picked up on this and created the Z1r. The machine now looks completely different. It's got the cast rim wheels. The front wheel is trimmed from 19 to 18 inches. The idea was to make the bike more manageable. The Gator and the 13 and 14 litre tanks are visually very appealing. The 4-in-1 exhaust, very sporty. Because the Z1r didn't do well here, Kawasaki Germany tried a version with a 4-in-4 exhaust, more like the old Z1. They sold the grand total of 11 machines with a 4-in-4 in Germany. There were pictures of it. There were advertising brochures for this model, known as Z1000S. But in reality, only 11 models were sold by the dealerships.
The Z1 can also be adapted to suit exotic preferences.
Das ist eine 78er Z1r.
This is a 1978 Z1r Tc. The Tc stands for turbocharged. That year, a little less than 500 units were manufactured. The man who thought this up was Alan Mussig. In 1977, he was vice president of Kawasaki America. He left the company and had the bright idea of modifying the standard Z1r by fitting it with a turbocharger. But he could only do this by excluding a warranty, which is why it became a flop in 1978. Basically, they just took a standard Z1r and hooked it up to this turbo kit. They couldn't offer a warranty because the standard motor simply wasn't built to take it. You might be able to boost the pressure up to 0.5 bar, but as soon as you open the valve a bit more, the engine kind of disintegrates. I'm talking from experience. I still have a few twisted crankshafts and melted cylinders down in the cellar. It doesn't work. If you want the engine to stay in one piece, and I've managed it with this one, you have to know all the tricks, and it also costs a great deal of money. To increase performance, you have to boost the pressure. Here's a pressure valve you can regulate. When you manage to boost it, as I have with an increase of 2 bars, you get 221 horsepower on the rear wheel. I enjoy riding a bike like this. I think it's great when the engine vibrates and rumbles a little and when the chassis isn't perfect. The turbocharged engine runs beautifully, but the chassis is completely overtaxed, and the brakes as well. But that's what makes it thrilling.